big Silicon Valley names today wouldn't exist without the involvement of the CIA or In-Q-Tel, the CIA's venture capital arm. Or in the case of, Facebook, you have sort of a DARPA connection there. So a lot of these, Silicon Valley companies, we were sort of sold this narrative, oh, it's just these guys in their garage and look at their brilliant startup. If you actually look into the narratives in a lot of those cases, that's not what you're going to find. You're going to find, In-Q-Tel or connections to powerful people and deal making and whatnot. But in a lot of the bigger names, you find the national security state there really from the off. And it has sort of, that relationship has been relatively, continuous from their founding onward. So I think if you look at Silicon Valley specifically, there's a really good book called Surveillance Valley by Yasha Levine. In looking at that, it sort of shows how the military industrial complex, which I would argue is really the military intelligence industrial complex, that particular group is looking as early as the Vietnam War of using what later becomes the internet, but technology as a way to surveil the population for the purpose of dissident hunting, like what we now see as the war on domestic terror, that they're trying to sort of foist upon the public using, of course, Silicon Valley as the means of doing that, or rather Silicon Valley products. So this is sort of a very long-standing agenda. And this was originally piloted in Vietnam as something called the Phoenix program, and was used extensive databases and, the technology of the time as a tool to basically launch a war of domestic terror within Vietnam, which resulted in a lot of civilians and alleged dissidents and all of this stuff. And if you look over time of the deep state or this particular factions of the national security state over time, even going through Iran-Contra, for example, you have the creation of something called the Main Core database, which was a names of millions of American perceived dissidents in the United States who, in the event of a vaguely defined national emergency, would be rounded up. And this, of course, is something that these actors have done in other countries, especially in that period of time. They'd been doing for decades from Vietnam on, from Vietnam to Operation Condor in Latin America, which the CIA designed and helped to run, and then some of the stuff going on in Central America, later. And they intended to turn this particular group behind Iran-Contra, intended to turn these tactics and this, basically this war, this style of war, back on the American public at some point.
The internet is worse than ever, and companies have taken full advantage of this. Every click, every search, every website you visit is being tracked, logged, and sold. Your data is the product, and most of the time, you don't even know who's buying it or what they're doing with it. You may say to yourself, I don't care, I have nothing to hide. But privacy isn't about hiding, it's about control. It's about deciding who gets access to your personal information, your location, and your online activity. That's where Private Internet Access, or PIA, comes in. With Private Internet Access, you can safeguard all your online activities with military-grade encryption, protecting you from hackers, governments, and even your internet provider. Plus, they have a strict no-logs policy, which means they don't track or store any of your browsing history, so your privacy stays private. One click and you're protected. No complicated setup required. That's why we use Private Internet Access. Get 83% off and 4 months free using our link for a limited time. You can click the link in the description to try it out today.
And these particular people were also very much intimately involved with a lot of these networks that Silicon Valley came out of. And so it's really no coincidence that today you sort of see this unfolding now. And the Main Core database, for example, the deep state never destroyed that. It still exists as far as we know. The last mainstream-ish media report on it was in 2008. And in 2008, it had 6 million Americans on it. I would assume that's higher now. Wow. But basically all of the surveillance of the NSA, that the NSA and all the other agencies suck up on you and data mine from you, it's all linked to your name in that database. So it's just a massive trove of data. And the way they turn that into actionable intelligence is through Palantir. Palantir is a definite CIA front company funded with, Peter Thiel's money, but also with In-Q-Tel money from the off. Yes. And for the first, I think 3 years as a company, their only client was the CIA, which basically molded their product into what it is. And according to Alex Karp, who I believe is still CEO of Palantir, Palantir, the CIA was always the intended client of Palantir when it was created. Palantir, from the evidence, seems to have been expressly created to replace a DARPA program called Total Information Awareness that was designed and going to be run by one of the top people from Iran-Contra, John Poindexter, who's also considered to be one of the godfathers of modern surveillance. And Total Information Awareness was totally attacked in even the mainstream media, in Congress, the ACLU, across the board dissent. They said it would eliminate privacy in the United States and totally destroy the Constitution. And so the program was defunded, but it was resurrected with the involvement of Peter Thiel and Alex Karp and Richard Pearl, who's from the Reagan administration, was an advisor, the Bush administration, and one of the architects of the Iraq War. He was there connecting Thiel with Poindexter to sort of resurrect TIA as Palantir. And so that's essentially what happened. And in the same time frame, another DARPA program was on the chopping block for the same reasons, called LifeLog. And Peter Thiel comes in and essentially puts a bunch of money behind Facebook, which is, today is analogous to what the LifeLog program was. And the day that LifeLog was shut down is the day that Facebook launched. All very coincidental. What? Yeah. But then if you look behind SBF, at least what people have been able to surmise so far, there's this network called Effective Altruism behind it. And if you look at the alleged founder of Effective Altruism, who's a British philosopher named William McCaskill, which isn't his real last name, that's his ex-wife's grandmother's surname. So interesting he would choose to use that publicly. I know, right? Already red flags everywhere, right? So anyway, McCaskill finds Sam Bankman-Fried as an undergrad, tells him where to take an internship at this high-frequency trading firm that's not that well known called Jane Street. And then at Jane Street, this is where Sam Bankman-Fried meets the core group of, FTX before FTX exists. And the people that follow him to FTX are not just Jane Street alums like he is, but also effective altruists, which has sort of culty vibes. They have like shared housing and all of this stuff in centers that are sort of littering, all over the world at this point, and they manage a lot of money. And then he leaves Jane Street, even though he's very well paid, due to an alleged moral quandary related to the effective altruist philosophy, and then creates Alameda Research, which is the hedge fund or trading arm of FTX. And he co-founds Alameda with a woman named Terry McCauley, who hasn't not been there for some time, but she was tied up with the Center for Effective Altruism, which is William McCaskill's organization. So you have McCaskill pretty much all over this. And then he's also an advisor to an FTX fund by the end of it, and only resigned after the collapse of FTX took place. So you have this guy basically guiding Sam Bankman-Fried's entire career. And what's interesting, so talking about this pandemic obsession that Sam Bankman-Fried allegedly had, and that actually William McCaskill, before the collapse of FTX, described Sam Bankman-Fried as having, you have one of the other big effective altruist organizations that has lots of money behind it, Open Philanthropy, be the group that finances Event 201, and then gives loads of money to the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security and a lot of these other pro-biosecurity organizations that have ties to the 2001 anthrax attacks and Dark Winter in June 2001 that since us, more or less predicted how the anthrax attacks were going to go down months before they happened, among other things, including the Nuclear Threat Initiative, which is tied up with that too. So Open Philanthropy also actively very, very much donating to these causes. And the big name behind Open Philanthropy, that's also one of the big names in effective altruism, aside from Sam Bankman-Fried, is Dustin Moskovitz, who's like Facebook co-founder with Mark Zuckerberg. So you start to sort of see this network there. But what's the more you look at it, it's very bizarre because a lot of their backstory doesn't make sense. But they have, according to them, billions of dollars of money that they manage. And there's even like connections to Elon Musk at an effective altruist summit. Peter Thiel gave the keynote speech. So you have a lot of these Silicon Valley guys very connected to this movement. And some people have noted that effective altruism is actually most popular in Silicon Valley than elsewhere. So this particular network definitely merits investigating. And it seems to be a sore spot for some people. Lex Friedman, the very popular podcaster, did an interview with William McCaskill. The FTX scandal breaks. He deletes it. A friend of mine, Marty Bent, calls him out for it, and Lex Friedman blocks him. He's not even direct tied necessarily until you look really into it to Sam Bankman-Fried, but people knew, I got to delete my stuff I did with William McCaskill promoting effective altruism now. So there definitely seems to be something there. So the question is, if this is the network, that we can sort of see this William McCaskill guy, and he's sort of pulling the strings, it seems, on Sam Bankman-Fried, and FTX is involved in, weird financial stuff with Ukraine, with the Democratic Party, and what have you, how powerful is this group really, and what are they trying to accomplish? So in terms of what you mentioned as to what may have been sort of the agenda behind this, sort of following the problem reaction solution model, which seems to happen, relatively often. A few months ago, you had Sam Bankman-Fried basically promoting the idea that FTX would become what he called the everything app. This is a buzzword I pay a lot of attention to these days because the everything app is invariably going to be the app that is tied to your digital ID, to your central bank digital currency, your social media, basically, when they mean everything. Yeah, he wanted FTX to be that. He wanted it to be the bridge from the current system to that system. But there's other people that want that too. So Elon Musk, for example, when he bought Twitter, said he wanted to make Twitter the everything app, following it off the WeChat model in China, which the WeChat in China is the closest thing, as far as I'm aware, to an everything app currently in wide use today, because it ties together social media, your finances, all other sorts of services tied to just that one app. And the parent company of WeChat is one of the top investors in Tesla and one of the most active advisors to Tesla as a company, which, by the way, Jeffrey Epstein was also advising before his second arrest. But
so that's what I said at the beginning. Do you see how all of these tentacles intertwine in some little way? And it feels like, even just like similarities between, like, where did Epstein get his billions? So we can't ever seem to get an answer on that. Where did SBF, where did Sam Bankman-Fried get his billions? We can't seem to get answers on that too.
Yeah, there's a lot of question marks there, because the origin story is it came from these arbitrage trades between the price of, that he was taking advantage of the price of Bitcoin being different in Asia than it is, well, Japan and Korea, South Korea, I think, than the US. But in order to actually have made billions off of that, he would have needed a lot of capital already at the time to have made that much money that quickly. And he's not really giving any answers on where that money has come from. And according to some people that have looked into this even prior to the collapse, became very evasive when asked about the origins of this money. And as far as I've been able to see, looking at other people on Twitter and elsewhere, it looks like the only name tied to an injection of money at that period of time is one of the co-founders of Skype, who it turns out is an effective altruist, giving money to SBF at this particular juncture. But it may have been more than just him. But again, it's this particular network you see pop up time and again, and it's very odd. So this particular company, again, FTX, Bloomberg announced that they were being investigated, it looks like, by the Southern District of New York months before the collapse. So there was some sort of tip-off, I guess. You had a couple of the top executives leave, who again are either tied to Jane Street effective altruism or both, before FTX actually collapses. And then you have William McAskill Center for Effective Altruism splintering into a bunch of pieces within the UK, like changing how it's registered. It's now been divided into like 5 or 6 shell companies, and William McAskill has used different variations of his name to try and disconnect them from each other. So one's registered to Dr. William McAskill, William David McAskill, William McAskill, Dr. William David, all these different variations, and they all have different, I mean, it's technically illegal, and that's what con men teams, normally do in like the British system to keep their companies disconnected and stuff. And he made that move in August, when apparently they were starting to be investigated. So there's a bunch of weird stuff going on with this particular network and money. And if you look at some of the funds that the Center for Effective Altruism manages, there's the guys at the top of that organization. There's maybe like 4 or 5 of them, and they have like different effective altruist groups themselves. The biggest one being the Center for Effective Altruism. And they're just making grants to each other in a circular fashion. So one makes $1 million grant to this group, and then that one makes $500,000 or $500,000 grants to the next one, and so on. And it's all just changing hands between these same groups. And to me, that looks like money laundering. But what do I know? And weird that you have FTX being accused of money laundering in its own right. And they were also, FTX, as soon as they started, were allegedly funneling large amounts of money back to the Center for Effective Altruism. So this looks like a big financial funny money scandal that's a lot bigger than FTX.